There's no right way to play Metal Gear, because even before MGS5 brought that sandbox component to the series, these have always been very open-ended games that encourage the player to come up with out-of-the-box solutions to progress. You're just as free to mow down enemies by the dozen as you are to ghost your way through the entire game, as long as you don't mind being chastised a bit by the devs if you do so. Keeping in mind that there is no right way to play, the games still do rank you at the end, and there is a highest rank, usually called Big Boss. Now, the requirements for this title differ between entries, but the gist does remain the same. Basically, it's like a lore-accurate run. Snake doesn't get caught, doesn't die, and doesn't kill anyone, to the best of his ability, with the added factor of a strict time limit thrown in for good measure. Now, even though that basic idea is the same across the franchise, the actual experience of going for this rank is wildly different depending on which one you're playing. Sometimes a big boss run can be a fun challenge that I believe any casual player could handle even after their first playthrough. On the other end of that spectrum, it can be a tense, demanding experience that requires a level of perfection that only really dedicated fans would ever really bother with. I went back and I got that big boss rank in every mainline game in the series, and clothed in this new knowledge, I can't help but want to share what that was like. In order to do that properly, I do have to start at the beginning. In our first ever introduction to the character, Solid Snake emerges from the water behind enemy lines. This is Operation Intrude N313, and our commanding officer, Big Boss, gives us a rundown of our mission: infiltrate the mercenary compound known as Outer Heaven. Metal Gear may have been ahead of its time when it came out, but it is still very much a game from 1987. But luckily for us, in the context of a big boss run, these limitations mostly come in the form of making the game fairly easy. Instead of vision cones, enemies can only see in a straight line, and most items respawn by leaving the room and going back in, so you can stock up on ammo to your heart's content. Neither of the original MSX2 games are particularly challenging compared to what will come later, so I didn't find myself following a guide very much. However, whenever I was confused, I would watch guides made primarily by YouTuber Soul Signal, who has great videos on both games and whose techniques I do use at certain parts. The requirements for a big boss run of this game are as follows: play on the original difficulty, never die, kill no one, get 8 or fewer alerts, use only one ration, and beat the game in under 45 minutes. Unlike later entries, there is no save limit, so feel free to do so constantly as you go. As you make your way through Outer Heaven, punching guards and saving hostages, you will eventually reach your first boss, and let me tell you, you're not going to find a lot of difficulty there either. While the bosses of later games would become industry icons, Metal Gear has such memorable encounters as Shotmaker, Machine Gun Kid, Fire Trooper, and Dirty Duck. Defeating these foes generally boils down to standing still and shooting them a bunch, and they rarely last longer than a few seconds. That may sound like I'm saying that Metal Gear is an objectively easy game, but that's because the big boss run actually strips a lot of its real challenge away. As was often the case in games from this era, Metal Gear is quite purposefully obtuse. You're meant to explore this facility top to bottom, and you get very little guidance on that front. In a blind playthrough, you're bombing walls looking for the one unmarked weak point, getting insta-killed by pitfall traps you'd have no way of knowing were there, and immediately taking damage because you didn't know the next room was going to be filled with poison gas. Most of Metal Gear's difficulty comes simply from not knowing what to do, and that just isn't an issue by the time you're trying a big boss run. That's not to say it's always a walk in the park. There are still parts I need to reload my save at consistently when I reach them. The biggest offender is this desert of scorpions that you have to backtrack through multiple times. These guys lock onto your position if you get too close, and they poison you if they touch you, which is an instant reset. Easily my least favorite part. Not a fan. One other part of this game that is uncharacteristically hard compared to the others is the 45-minute time limit. Metal Gear has by far the strictest time constraint in the series. I can wrap a lot of the other games with an hour or more to spare for the big boss run, but I'm usually lucky if I scrape 5 minutes of wiggle room off the end of this one. The run isn't bad, but you do have to respect it. As I continued on through the facility and reached the back half of the game, I was feeling pretty good about myself, and that overconfidence came back to bite me. You may remember that seemingly contrary to the point of this run, you can get caught up to 8 times and use 1 ration. Those 8 alerts may seem generous, but in reality, that's actually how many times the game actively requires you to get caught as part of the story. Many of these instances involved forced combat sections that are almost guaranteed to shave off some of your health bar. As I entered the final act of the game, my hubris meant that I wasn't checking a guide for this entry, and these forced encounters were taking a toll on my health, so I decided to use my 1 allotted ration. I kept going on as usual until I was finally able to reach the titular Metal Gear, but immediately prior to that room is an electric floor. I forgot about that electric floor. There is no way to turn off that electric floor, and there's no way to bypass the electric floor. All you can do is run forward, and I had about 2/3 of my health left, but no matter how hard I cut that corner, it wasn't enough. I couldn't physically survive without taking a ration, but because I had already taken a ration earlier, this would void my big boss run, and thus, the rank was now impossible on this save. Luckily, like I said, I saved like 1,000,000 times prior to this, so I just loaded an earlier one, took less damage, and tanked the floor, which only took like 10 minutes. But let this be a lesson to you. Like with the alert requirements, the ration requirement is deceptive. I was left with a sliver of health to complete the game with, but luckily, most of the challenge is now behind us. For Metal Gear itself, all you have to do is remember the correct order to blow up its feet in order to cause a total system shutdown, and it feels more like a Rubik's Cube solution than a boss fight.
Right, left inverted, right inverted.
But the game isn't over. As Metal Gear is rendered inert and the facility is set to blow, Big Boss himself is revealed as the true villain of the game, and he wants to take you down with him. Big Boss is the greatest soldier to ever live, and his ability to not just stand completely still while you murder him puts him head and shoulders above the rest of the bosses. I won't lie, I still had next to no health from the electric floor, so I did die a couple times here. But not even Big Boss can go toe-to-toe with his protege's greatest asset, unlimited saves. Snake escapes into the sunset as Outer Heaven is destroyed behind him, and in a moment of narrative depth that we get to see a lot more of in Kojima's later work, he doesn't celebrate, instead grappling with the weight of what he endured in the field. Then I grappled with the weight of what I did, which is beat Metal Gear with a Big Boss rank. Nice. Getting Big Boss rank in Metal Gear 1 is, in my opinion, a great way to play the game. Even though the forced damage and the required alerts make it clear that the rank was something added in post, not part of the original release, it still tests your expertise without ever being too punishing. It does have the roughest time limit in the series, and you've got to be ready to take a ton of damage to pure RNG and obnoxious damage sources, but it's a solid way to start the Big Boss journey. Alright, now we're getting serious. Metal Gear is great, but it's a product of its time. Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, on the other hand, is a must-play that laid the groundwork for the games that would come to overshadow it later. The narrative is infinitely more complex than the first, solidifying Solid Snake's personality and delving into themes like the brainwashing of children in war zones, the treatment of soldiers as disposable assets, and the fickle nature of friend and foe, themes that would continue to be prominent in the franchise for years after. But this is a Big Boss run, so we're skipping all those cutscenes anyways. This time around, Snake has to infiltrate and save hostages from the autonomous mercenary state known as Zanzibar Land. For the Big Boss rank, we have to play on original difficulty, get no continues, no rations used, 6 or fewer alerts, 5 or fewer kills, and beat the game in under 2 hours. Unlike the strict time limit of the first game, I usually manage to beat Metal Gear 2 with half an hour to spare at least, so that is an immediate relief. You may end up needing those extra minutes though, because you can't coast on technical limitations quite the same way you could in the last game. Enemies can now see in a vision cone in front of them, and they can even turn their heads, requiring you to be acutely aware of their movements at all times. Guards don't reset when you change screens, and they can hear noises now too, meaning they have all sorts of avenues to catch you that they didn't have last time. At the same time, Snake has some new tools of his own to even the odds. He now has the ability to crouch and go prone, along with a precursor to the Soliton radar system, which shows him the enemy movements of all guards within a 9-screen grid. Using these tools to my advantage as best I could, it wasn't long before I reached the first boss, the wonderfully named Black Ninja. This guy has some awesome lore connections to the last game, really hammering in how much more narrative meat it has on its bones than its predecessor. But again, we're skipping his dialogue for this run, so you'll have to find out all that stuff for yourself. What is relevant to a big boss run, though, is that these boss encounters are much more complex from the get-go than we were used to in the last game. Black Ninja can teleport around the room to throw projectiles at you, forcing you to employ strategies beyond stand in one place and press the shoot button. Later, you have to fight a Hind D by shooting it out of the sky from a different screen entirely, and later still you have to fight a creepy guy named Red Blaster who you have to throw grenades at while he crawls around like the Fear from MGS3. From both a narrative and mechanical standpoint, we've come a long way from bosses like Shotmaker, even if the names haven't really improved much. This commitment to providing a wide variety of unique encounters when compared to the first game isn't just seen in the bosses. There's a section where you have to identify an ally by waiting to see which guard goes to the women's restroom, you have to lure down a pigeon with a ration to get vital information, and you have to wait for an egg in your inventory to hatch, so an owl will hoot and make a guard leave his post because he thinks his shift is over. And this game is honestly so weird. It has a lot of that now classic Kojima humor that in the first game we didn't really get to see a lot of yet. But not all of these unique scenarios hit the mark. Right after killing Black Ninja, I was presented with an annoyingly long tailing sequence in what was essentially an outdoor maze, and right after that was basically my Scorpion section for this game, the swamp. You have to navigate an invisible path over bubbling mud, and if you fall in, you only have a couple seconds to get out. I had to reload a couple times here just due to impatience getting me killed. The tedium gets to me every time I play this part. I just don't like it. Now I was making good time in my run when I came upon this weird room filled with guard-shaped mannequins, and it is an important room to keep note of on a big boss run. While every death and alert allowed in the first game was mandatory, that's not actually the case in Metal Gear 2. Now in each of these rooms there are a couple of real guards hidden among the mannequins, but which ones exactly are random each time, and there are some spawn locations where you can just instantly get caught when you enter the room. There isn't anything you can do about that other than reset your save, but since you're apparently allowed up to 5 alerts, you don't technically need to. I personally ended up getting 2 alerts, but in some runs I've gotten as many as 4 due to just bad luck in this one area. The RNG nature of these specific sections is quite unique to Metal Gear 2, and I don't really love it. All of this culminates in the final 3 boss encounters. The first is Metal Gear itself, and unlike in the last game, it is a real fight against a mech that actually fights back. You have to dodge its missiles and machine gun fire, which you can do pretty easily by baiting it into attacking at the bottom of the screen, running up to dodge it, and then looping back down to hit it with a grenade, rinse and repeat. The second fight is the pilot, Gray Fox. With all your items burned up after Metal Gear was destroyed, you are left having a fist fight in a minefield, which is very cool in concept, even if in practice it essentially just requires you to spin in a circle and press the punch button while he blows himself up. Finally, we have Big Boss himself, returned from the dead in a fashion so inconceivable that only a 150-hour prequel made 25 years later could possibly explain it for me. Unlike the dipping and weaving RPG battle of Metal Gear, this is a puzzle boss, forcing you to sneak around escape room style to collect gear in the right order so that you can burn your old mentor to death with hairspray and a lighter. In a big boss run, you'll almost certainly know exactly where to go by this point, kind of negating the puzzle aspect, but I do love how the last boss in this game is also the most creative one, really showcasing how far we had come since all of the really dull bosses in Metal Gear 1. With all the baddies dead, all that's left to do is escape, but this process isn't quite as straightforward as it was in the last game. When I was young, this was where I would cash in those 5 allotted kills that we get, and I'm pretty sure you can just do that. You have to run to the extraction point with your one and done love interest Holly, and hold off the guards until the chopper picks you up to end the game. You can kill these guys and still stay within your limit, and that is probably what you're expected to do, but in that soul signal guide I talked about, I learned that if you just kind of punch these guys and stun them in place, eventually they just leave, which definitely doesn't feel intentional, and it's kind of anticlimactic, but it lets you hit credits with 0 kills. And after that, that's it, another big boss rank in the bag. There's a lot more to juggle and remember compared to the last game, but with the very lenient time limit and wiggle room with kills and alerts, this is a much less stressful experience. The RNG mannequin section is a bit weird, and the tailing and prolonged swamp traversal section was a tedious start, but at the end I was having so much fun with Metal Gear 2 compared to the first, and I do think these challenge runs being legitimately fun, in addition to being hard, does count for a lot. Well, we're finally playing a game you people have actually played. To get the big boss rank in Metal Gear Solid, you need to beat the game in under 3 hours, never die, get 4 or fewer alerts, and use 1 or fewer rations. Once again, there's no save limit, so you still have a lot of space for trial and error. You can actually kill a whopping 25 people here and still get the rank, but you can't get too excited about that, and I'll explain why later. Another weird note is that if you're playing on the Master Collection that came out a couple years back, you can boot the original Japanese version of the game, which allows you to play on easy difficulty and still get the big boss rank. That would be against the spirit of this video, so I'm not doing that, but if you just want to get the trophies or experience the run on an easier difficulty, all power to you. It was here that I started referencing guides more consistently, and for MGS 1, 2, and 3, I was primarily looking at videos made by Masked Matador, Perfect Stealth, and Center Strain 01, very helpful videos on all 3 channels. This run is a pretty smooth one as you make your way through the iconic intro sequence, but it gets a little weird once you reach that first forced combat section where you meet Meryl. Despite being the game to invent the big boss ranking, it honestly feels the least suited for one of any game in this series to me. There are several sequences where combat is basically mandatory, and while that 25 kill limit may seem very tempting, you really don't have much space to move. While you have to kill the first 3 guards in order for the game to progress, you definitely can't kill 1 or 2 more after that without going over your limit. Instead, you have to find a strategy that causes Meryl to kill them for you while you dip and weave around, and I mean, looking at this footage, it just doesn't feel like this is the intended way to play this game. There are a lot of encounters like this. There is not 1, but 2 elevator fights where you are forced to kill enemies and hope your body armor can keep your health bar high enough to make it to the next area, and there's this stairway chase that I always get clipped on at least a few times. A lot of these sections require way more RNG than I'd like when it comes to taking damage, and I definitely had to reload my saves in these areas multiple times. This feeds into a change in philosophy that the Big Boss run has in MGS1 compared to the first 2. In those games, I would argue that the hardest part was remembering your routes and following them to a T, and the bosses and the combat encounters were a bit of an afterthought. Here, however, the bosses are a much bigger factor. They are much more complex, and they act as bottlenecks on extreme difficulty that will stall your progress until you can perfect their mechanics. As a result, when I was doing my big boss run of Metal Gear Solid, it kind of felt like a boss rush of sorts. I was breezing through the stealth encounters because they really aren't that much harder than they would be on normal difficulty, and I spent most of my time and effort on building up the resources and skills to take out the bosses. Enemies like Psycho Mantis, Grey Fox, and the Hind D are multi-phase encounters with way more complex attack patterns to memorize than anything the previous games had. Other bosses require a level of precision that is really tough to achieve on dated PS1 controls, like threading the needle to throw a grenade right into the hatch of the tank twice in a row, or hitting all your shots on Sniper Wolf while you inhale diazepam. It is because of this increase in difficult encounters that I felt encouraged to do something I didn't really have to do in the first 2 games. Cheesing.
Hiding won't help you. You're pretty good.
With the constant time pressure and a tiny health bar in mind, it's easy to take on a by any means necessary approach to these fights. I learned if you stand in the right spot and shoot at Ocelot, he can't actually hit you, making you functionally invincible. And I'll be honest, even on a regular playthrough, I usually just bust out the Nikita to bypass the second wolf fight entirely. This took me into Disc 2, where I continued that energy by stun-locking Vulcan Raven in place and pelting him with missiles without any real resistance. Now, after this, I finally reached Metal Gear Rex, and with that, the infamous card key sequence. A lot of people don't like this part of the game because it is a boring backtracking section where nothing really happens, but honestly, the game is just so high octane that at this point, I didn't mind the break. I froze the key, I warmed the key, and then we got into the final bosses. Metal Gear Rex is an endurance test with its 2 back-to-back health bars, and he can seem intimidating at first, but once you know his beam, gun, and missile attack patterns, it's pretty easy to get him in a loop and chip away at his health fairly consistently. The Liquid Snake fight after this is pretty easy. In all seriousness, it actually is really easy to lock Liquid in place by hitting him twice over and over, but I do love this boss so much that I think it's worth fighting him normally, especially since by this point I knew I was fine on time. The hardest part is honestly lining Snake up with him using PS1 controls, but it was so worth it to weave around his punches, punish his big charges, and take him down with 0.83 seconds remaining on the clock. Finally, as per tradition, we had the final escape, which I did do with Otacon because it lets you finish the game faster, but again, by this point I realized I could have done that torture sequence and still had plenty of time to spare and save Meryl, so maybe next time I would do that. You get the last of your required kills here as you mow down some guards with a mounted machine gun, and again, it's always a surprise that this is the game that started the big boss rank, because it really does like making you kill things. After this, they saved the worst for last, because we have Liquid's final barrage. Yeah, I didn't like the Scorpions, I didn't like the Swamp from the last 2 games, but this is on another level. It is just so hard to keep him from absolutely shredding my health, and so often I feel like I'm aiming right at him, and it just isn't registering. The jankiness of this section and how often I had to redo it made this one of the most anger-inducing parts of the entire franchise for me. I still probably couldn't do it consistently if you asked me to go back in right now. It's an unfortunate finale that left a bad taste in my mouth. But luckily right after this, I got my big boss confirmation screen, and that did sweeten things back up. Metal Gear Solid is just a very, very different experience from Metal Gear 1 and 2. And while stealth of course remains very core to that experience, so much of your time is just spent in combat. It definitely requires a level of practice and patience that takes things up a notch, but nothing compared to what would come next. So yeah, this is it. This is the hard one. And not just like a little bit harder than the others or anything like that, but like levels above anything else the series ever asked of the player prior or ever would again. And while it's true that the game is much more complex with intricate enemy AI that still impresses to this day, there's only one real reason that this big boss rank is so much harder to achieve. The rank requirements are pretty consistent with what we've seen so far. 0 continues, under 3 hours, no kills, no rations, less than 10 health bars of damage taken, 700 or fewer shots taken, and the radar off. And that is more restrictions than before, but we're not really getting into combat encounters anyway, we're sneaking around and not shooting a ton, so it's nothing too egregious. But then you have the kicker, 8 or fewer saves. It was the lack of a save restriction that made it so that many of the encounters in previous games were really doable for pretty much anyone who had the patience to keep reloading and trying again. But with only 8 saves, you have to make some difficult decisions about what you are and aren't willing to redo over and over. Now the tanker mission is basically a tutorial, so I knew I wasn't going to save there. It only has one boss fight, which is the shootout with Olga, which basically teaches you the shooting mechanics, and one forced combat encounter. And while this encounter felt familiar coming off the tail of MGS1, these big, health-draining fights are actually quite rare in MGS2. The bosses are where you have to practice your combat abilities, but outside of them you do get much longer stretches of pure sneaking around, which was a nice change. And while the bosses are still definitely a sticking point, this save restriction brought tension skyrocketing back to the regular stealth encounters for me. Doing an entire loop around Shell 1 for the bomb defusal, or disguising myself as a guard to gain access to the hostages are segments that are pretty relaxed on easier difficulties, but they are nail-biting if you can't actually save along the way. Speaking of that, my first save was when I got to the big shell and I started playing as Raiden, and a lot of people like to wait to save until a little later, but I just did not want to have to redo that entire tanker chapter and the bomb circuit. It was more than I was willing to entertain, and it would have been a solid half hour of progress. As a result of that, I didn't have the option of saving when I reached the Fortune encounter. Now she isn't really a boss fight, as all you have to do is survive, which you can do by moving back and forth under your protective box, but with bad RNG she can easily take the run from you, so I understand why some people prefer to save here. I just didn't feel like it in this run. Now, despite how tough it is, situations like this where I had to forego saving on a hard part don't actually happen that often in this big boss run. While 8 saves may seem ridiculous, and it can definitely feel like it sometimes, as I said before, there are far fewer combat bottlenecks in MGS2 when compared to MGS1, and picking the logical spots for me to save honestly didn't end up being that hard. Once Fortune was done, my 7 remaining saves were just enough to get me through the most problematic encounters in the game. But that being said, these fights can still be very problematic. I consider this a much harder game than MGS1, even if we're not accounting for the big boss rank, and there really isn't any boss that I didn't cheese in some way or another. I shot Olga through a small gap and got her stuck in a loop until she died. Fat Man's main mechanic is to plant bombs all over the arena, so I just followed him and made sure he couldn't even do that. I found a corner of the Harrier boss arena where I was immune to most attacks, and for Vamp, I stun-locked him in place by abusing the iframes of climbing up a ledge, and I got his AI stuck in a loop for an easy kill. Again, very much appreciating the guides by people like Masked Matador, Center Strain 01, and Perfect Stealth. At this point, I had saved 4 times, and I was over halfway through the game, so I was more than on track. Unfortunately, right after Vamp is the EE Escort mission, one of the most infamous escort missions in all of gaming. You have to take her by the hand and slowly walk her through the facility, putting her on your back when you need to swim places, getting rid of any bugs that might scare her, and finding a safe spot to leave her when you need to take out enemies. Even on a big boss run where you know the exact route and you waste no time, this part is just so tedious. And it's not even really the part that I hate. My actual least favorite part of the game is when you get to the end of this segment and you need to protect EE while she slowly tight ropes around a large area and you snipe any potential enemies who might attack her. I always save here. There is no way I'm doing that escort section again, and even though the sniping part is pretty consistent once you've done it a few times, it is so long and so boring. I don't like this part in a normal run, let alone a big boss run. I was basically in the final act of the game at this point, with 3 saves remaining. And let me tell you, you need those 3 saves badly here. Remember when I said there aren't many forced combat encounters in this game? This is where the kindness ends. We get not 1, but 2 massive fights with an elite enemy unit known as the Tengus. Making up for how few of these fights were in the game up to this point, these particular encounters are the most brutal of their kind in the series. So brutal, in fact, that I don't know if I could do it. These guys chunk so much of your health, and you have to take them out in waves in 2 separate areas. So in the spirit of the rest of this run, I cheese them too. I use methods I found in Masked Matador's Big Boss Guide to skip them entirely. The first one is tough because you have to glitch yourself through a door by pressing up against it in first person and letting go of first person halfway through your spin kick animation. I had to do this 3 or 4 times before it actually worked, so I definitely needed that save. Now the second skip required me to grab a guard and basically hold him hostage in the back room while Snake took care of all the enemies outside, and eventually the game just skipped ahead. So that one was a lot easier. I have no idea how it works, but I'm not about to tempt Providence. I take what I can get. Now, those were complex, those were difficult, but they were not the hardest part of the game, and in an act of abject brutality, it does not reset your health for the next part. This is the single hardest encounter in the franchise, in my opinion, the Metal Gear Ray fight. Now, if you don't know, this game requires you to fight a series of Metal Gear Ray units in a row, and the exact number is based on your difficulty. On very easy, you fight the 3 that you see in front of you. On extreme, they cycle in a total of 20. What you have to do is stun lock each ray by looping a rocket to its knee and then to its face, juggling up to 3 rays at any given time. And this amounts to up to 10 minutes straight of manipulating the AI of not 1, but 20 different enemies. This requires a lot of patience and a lot of precision, and it takes very little to lose your rhythm. And if you do that, that pretty much means you're restarting the whole fight. This is a must-save section for me, and in my opinion, the most punishing boss in any of the games that I cover in this video. Here's me forgetting which button to press during the next cutscene, and almost having to do that whole thing again. After the brutality of the Tengus and the Rays, fighting Solidus at the end is very much a kind of reprieve. He is the one and only fight that I don't cheese in any way. A genuinely good boss with easy to understand mechanics, and whacking him with the blunt end of your sword is the victory lap we all deserve after getting this far. I let out a sigh of relief when I got to the credits and I saw my big boss rank. And obviously I was very happy that I had made it through the run, but honestly my main takeaway was wondering who the heck set up the requirements for this thing, because none of the other games are like this. It just comes out of nowhere difficulty-wise. That being said, I do appreciate that it eases up on that boss rush vibe I got in MGS1, and I like the fact that so much of the challenge is actually found in the stealth and not in the combat encounters. But it does require a level of perfection that I think the average player just won't have an interest in. So if you do know someone with the big boss rank in MGS2, they probably really love this game. In Metal Gear Solid 3, the highest rank is called Foxhound instead of Big Boss for lore reasons, and I got major whiplash doing it right after MGS2. Not only are there no encounters that even touch the difficulty of the Tengu Rush or the Ray boss fight, but you also get a whopping 25 saves, which after the last game might as well be infinite. You get a full 5 hours to beat the game, which is wild because it is in no way longer than MGS 1 or 2. There is absolutely no stress to maximize your efficiency here. Now other than that, the requirements are familiar. Don't get caught, don't kill anyone, never use life meds, and take fewer than 10 health bars of damage. We finally graduate to full third-person camera control, along with a ton of overlapping systems like hunting and foraging, camouflage, and a wound care menu. But while the moment-to-moment gameplay is more complex, the progression is significantly simplified. This is a very linear game when compared to the open-ended facilities we infiltrated in the past. You basically just go from area to area in a straight line with only a couple small instances of backtracking, a far cry from wandering Outer Heaven aimlessly in Metal Gear 1. Getting lost, a major setback in other runs, just isn't all that likely in MGS3. Now if you want to make your life even easier, feel free to boot up the Delta remake that came out last year. A lot of aspects of the remake are admittedly a little harder, like the fact that the Mark 22 trank gun has pretty significant bullet drop, and several of the bosses were tuned up in difficulty a little bit. But what supersedes all of that is the fact that there is no save restriction in the remake. Not only that, but the game actively autosaves every single time you enter a new area, so you don't even have to manual save regularly. I still strongly recommend you do, because you never know what's going to happen, but it's worth noting. Even with the 25 saves, I never bother saving in the Virtuous mission, which can be done in under 10 minutes. Once Operation Snake Eater starts, I consider the run truly begun, and soon after touching down, you reach your first tussle with Ocelot. Now one of the biggest points of whiplash in this run is that I fought every boss pretty much normally. My cheesing days were left behind in MGS2, and while there certainly still is a challenge present in taking out the bosses in MGS3, I never felt the need to find shady ways to get the win. I didn't even bother looking up guides for bosses like Ocelot, the Pain, or the Fear, because fighting them as I normally would have just took a little longer, but the basic strategies worked fine. Even a boss like the End, who has built-in, intended ways to cheese him, isn't worth cheesing in this run. You still can run out the clock and wait for him to die of old age, but if you fight him legitimately, you get access to the Mosin Nagant non-lethal sniper rifle, which is, in my opinion, an invaluable tool against the Furies shortly after. Personally, I think the End is the hardest fight in the game because of how unpredictable he can be, but like I said, you have hours of wiggle room here. I took my time, I snuck up on him slowly, and eventually I did get that win. There just isn't much to say about the stealth in this game. The larger areas and full camera control make it so that you have great visibility on your surroundings at all times, and I was pretty much never stumped as to how to get past a section undetected. In MGS2, there is no way I could have gotten the big boss rank without help from guides, but in MGS3, I honestly think most people could quite easily figure out a route of their own, which is a very different experience. The finale of this game is really action-packed. After sneaking through Groznygrad, you have the Volgin fight, which is one of my favorites in the game. It has a lot of moves that you have to avoid before you can go in and perform these CQC techniques on him, and learning these moves and how to dodge them is consistent and fun. Then you fight him on the Shagohod, and despite how imposing it seems, this part is really easy too. Just shoot the treads, shoot the target, shoot the treads, shoot the target. Again, no cheesing required. There is one part that I did cheese, the motorbike chases. These long segments can be tedious on repeat playthroughs, and you can take a lot of damage, So why do that when you can just wear the Cold War outfit and enemies just don't shoot you? Which is really weird, but hey, it works. Now, I don't think this works in the remake, but in that case, the Mosin remains your friend. Just quickscope any enemy you see. And don't worry, if you shoot a man with a non-lethal round and he falls off his bike and explodes, you didn't kill him, according to the stats. I didn't struggle with this part on either version of the game, and we were spared the frustration we had in a vehicle chase like the one in MGS1. Even the final section where you have to escort Eva is mercifully not that bad. I would say this is the first game in the series that doesn't have a moment that I hate replaying every time, like the Scorpion part, or the Swamp, or the Jeep section, or the EE escort mission. It doesn't have a dip like that. The game is just solid throughout. Speaking of which, it really does end on a high note. The boss challenges you in an open field of white flowers. It took me a few tries, but learning how to perfectly counter her CQC attacks made her an amazing and satisfying boss. It's just such a great way to end the game. Getting Foxhound rank in MGS3 is not a walk in the park, but it does feel like one after MGS2, and I'm not complaining, but it makes it all the more baffling that MGS2 was even that hard. I needed a long break from that game after I finished it, but MGS3's Foxhound run was so nice that I did it twice. The hardest part about playing Metal Gear Solid 4 is finding a way to play Metal Gear Solid 4. Not only did I have to dust off my dying PS3, but I also realized that MGS4 is not compatible with the PS4 controller, unlike all the other games I play on that platform, so I had to go back to my old DualShock 3 controller with a broken start button and sticks that get stuck every time you touch them. Luckily, I would argue that MGS4's big boss run is on the easier end of the spectrum, so I was able to live with my limited hardware situation. You have to play on the boss extreme, finish in under 5 hours, get no continues, no alerts, no kills, and use no rations. All very standard. For whatever reason, we have circled all the way back around to infinite saves, so again, no idea what they were thinking with MGS2. Unlike the single location infiltration missions we've been used to up till now, MGS4 is a globe-trotting adventure with 5 unique chapters. Like MGS3, this game is pretty linear, with the focus being on going from point A to point B rather than exploring an open facility. The first 2 chapters feel like pretty standard sneaking missions, but things do escalate in a kind of weird way after that. Remember back in Metal Gear 2, like 20 minutes ago, when I was talking about how Kojima was throwing all sorts of one-and-done scenarios into the mix, like hatching an owl and luring in pigeons? Well, MGS4 brings that mentality back with a vengeance. Kojima was just doing stuff in this game. We got turret sections, we got tailing missions, we got a mech battle. So many instances where new mechanics are introduced and only exist for a few minutes before they disappear. But by far, the biggest thing you're going to spend your time doing in this game is the primary bosses you fight in this game are the Beauty and the Beast unit, and something very unique about them is that they don't die when you deplete their health bar. Instead, they leave their armored suits and have a cinematic scene where you have to take them out in that form. What this means is that you can use whatever weapons you want to take them down, because you don't need to worry about non-lethal means until they leave the suit, by which point they're just walking at you slowly and you don't need good weapons anyways. Being forced to use your tranq gun on bosses was a point of challenge in MGS2 and 3, so you have a lot more freedom in this game to use whatever means you want to take them out in MGS4. Speaking of that freedom, MGS4 is chock full of weapons to use. You have access to Drebin, the arms dealer, from the start menu at any time, and as long as you keep collecting Drebin points, you can be in some pretty sticky situations and he'll just beam weapons and ammo to you from the pause screen. Kinda takes away some of the challenge, but who am I to complain? Like with MGS3, I never felt the need to cheese these bosses, and that's in large part because you just have so many tools to take them out. I obliterated Laughing Octopus with a heavy machine gun, I blasted Raging Raven out of the air with a 50 cal sniper rifle, I knocked out Crying Wolf in just 6 stun grenades, and I used whatever gun I wanted to shoot down Screaming Mantis's doll to take control of her nanomachines and end the fight. That one's a bit weird. Man, remember 6-axis motion controls? Now, in every game up to this point, except for MGS3, I've talked about that one section. You know, the part that I dread every time because it just sucks the fun out of the playthrough for a bit. MGS4 has one, and it is the entire third chapter of the game. Remember when I complained about tailing a guard in Metal Gear 2 for like 3 minutes? Try 20 minutes of just walking through the streets of Europe with almost nothing happening. Like, what were they thinking with this? It's hard to believe any playtester looked at this and thought, yeah, that's a good way to spend my time. But honestly, that's not even the part that's really that bad. It leads into the motorcycle chase with Big Mama. And this is it. This is the be-all, end-all for me. This is the worst thing that exists in any of these big boss runs. You have to survive like 10 minutes getting driven around by your mom while soldiers shred your health in seconds. There are so many parts where you need to have basically perfect aim and timing, and if you mess up, it's right back to the menu to load your last save. Nothing in this franchise has ever infuriated me more than this one section. It dwarfs the frustration I felt in the MGS1 driving segment. Nothing else has felt this unfair or untested, and I honestly felt no satisfaction when I finally did it. Just relief that it was finally over. At the very least, I can say it's all uphill from here. Something I didn't fully realize until this playthrough is how little stealth this game has in the back half. You have Chapter 3 where the only real stealth is the tailing segment, which obviously isn't very traditional, and that goes straight into Chapter 4, which is the MGS1 throwback part of the game, that might as well be a combat set-piece gauntlet, throwing 2 boss fights, a horde of geckos, and the Rex v. Ray mech battle at you. I definitely died at least once here just trying to remember the controls for this giant robot that you only need to know for this one 5-minute segment. This goes into the final chapter, which really doesn't have much stealth at all. After a brief chunk right at the beginning that I can finish in under 2 minutes, you go straight into the Screaming Mantis fight, followed by this room full of dwarf geckos that always annoys me. I just buy whatever the best weapon I can find from Drebin is, and I just blast them all away. This is by far the most combat-heavy Metal Gear game since MGS1. It's definitely wild just how much time you spend in different combat set pieces. After this, you have... I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this game, but the ending always wins me back. That one last fight against Liquid Ocelot. It's a 4-phase fist fight. Hard to say. It's a 4-phase fist fight where each stage represents a different MGS game. But as long as you remember to block in the first 2 stages and you wail on him mercilessly in the Snake Eater phase, it's really not too bad. Not that this is a boss that I really mind redoing a couple times, because it is really cool. I will say though, he has this heavy punch in his second phase, and he can just destroy your health bar in like 2 hits. That one feels like a bit much. But everything else feels fair and fun, and it is a great finale. And I'm glad for that, because I think this game really needed to end on a win. But it isn't over yet. The true test comes next. An endless barrage of skipping cutscenes and sitting through the unskippable credits. You'll need to have at least 20 minutes to spare when you beat Liquid and you end the gameplay portion of this game, or else you're not going to make it. Personally, I left to go fold my clothes, and when I came back after the credits, I had yet another big boss run done. You may have gotten it from my tone, but this is my least favorite one to do. It's not that hard compared to something like MGS2, but like I said, it just has so many sections that I hate having to do every time that I play. There's so much RNG, so many precise situations I can't consistently replicate. There are just a lot of parts that feel more tedious and frustrating than they do challenging and demanding. Now those moments don't define the whole game. A vast majority of the game was very fun to play through, and I'm very glad to say that I've done it. I do have to respect the fact that it is, in many ways, the last of its kind. I say MGS4 is the last of its kind because it had the last true big boss rank in the series. The next mainline game is Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and that saw a major shift in the franchise's basic structure. Instead of a single infiltration mission, this game comprises nearly 200 bite-sized operations, more accessible for the PSP audience. As a result, there is obviously no big boss rank because you can't really do that with this kind of game. However, you can get an S rank on each and every mission, and doing so does get you a trophy called Big Boss. I figure that was close enough for me. Getting S ranks on the main missions really doesn't leave much to talk about. Because of the technical limitations of a portable system, the missions are short and the AI is simple compared to the PS2 games. I didn't ever really need a guide to S rank any of these main missions, which usually just required you to do a combination of going fast, not getting caught, and not killing anyone. The real challenge comes from the 130 extra ops missions. A lot of these are fairly simple requests, like getting through certain maps undetected or holding up every guard on a map, and some others are really just silly diversions. But the part of the game that will really suck up your time is that 60 of the 130 missions, nearly half, are boss fights against any variety of vehicles, mechs, and weirdly enough, monsters from Monster Hunter. None of these are the hardest things in the world, but there's just so many of them that they really end up being the thing that sticks in my head when I'm done. The regular vehicles just require you to knock out all the guards so the captain pops his head out and you can trank him, while the mech fights require an old-fashioned damage sponge battle. Beating these with ease really doesn't require skill so much as playing the game enough to invest in R&D so that you have the best possible weapons. For example, you can actually still get S ranks in this game with the infinite ammo bandana, so combining that with the strongest weapons really trivializes the game. But you do have to be ready to pump in the time and the effort to get all that stuff. I played about 70 hours before I had S-ranked every mission in the game, so it's more about building up your base and your stats and all that than the perfection of individual scenarios and mechanics that we had in the earlier big boss runs. There is, however, one way to make these boss battles quite easy, and that is playing in co-op. You can make your life much easier if you have friends playing with you who also know the right strategies and have the right equipment for the job. The following is all the footage that I collected of me playing with my friends. We reach the end of the series, and while Metal Gear Solid 5 is a great game, it can't really be said that it has anything that fits the topic of this video. It is mission-based, similar to Peace Walker, but with much longer, open-ended operations built with consoles in mind. And while it may not be called Big Boss this time around, there is a trophy for getting S ranks in every mission. But when you look beneath the surface, you see that even compared to Peace Walker, it has strayed pretty far from what makes a Big Boss rank possible. Getting S rank in a mission in MGS5 is based around a point system, and there is no one factor other than using illegal items like the Infinity Bandana that'll nullify your chance of getting the S rank. While you do get points for not getting caught and not killing anyone like in a big boss run, by far the most important factor is time. As long as you complete the mission fast enough, you can get a bit bloody and let the entire enemy faction see you and still be okay. For example, in this mission, I just request my helicopter to hover over an enemy camp, shoot 3 objectives from the chopper, and finish the mission without ever touching down while all the enemies below shoot at me. Still an S rank. Another difference from Peace Walker is the fact that there aren't many boss fights. While destroying tanks and robots was what I spent most of my time doing in that game, MGS5 is far more dedicated to giving you a variety of basic stealth experiences. The boss fights are there, but I would argue this is the game that prioritizes them the least since Metal Gear 1. When you do have a boss fight, however, the deal is similar to Peace Walker. If you invest enough points into R&D, you can make sure you always have a weapon that can make short work of whatever encounter you have in front of you pretty easily. None of this is a criticism of MGS5. I had a wonderful time revisiting the game, and it's not like it owed us some kind of big boss rank alternative. Those things are not necessary parts of the games. I instead love doing things like getting the Platinum Trophy, collecting all the plants and animals, managing Mother Base, just basically maxing out as much stuff as I could. But this video is about the big boss rank, and I do think it's safe to say that by the time MGS5 came out, that concept had somewhat gone by the wayside in this series. If there's one thing I got out of this journey, it's that these games hold up so well. A lot of games buckle under their own weight when you restrict the player so much with harder difficulties, but every entry in the Metal Gear franchise is so well crafted that I would say each and every run was worth doing, even at their most frustrating. Yeah, MGS2 was kind of ridiculous compared to the others, and MGS4 was a bit less fun in my opinion, But even after 8 straight games, I never got tired of learning new encounters and coming up with new stealth routes. Even S-ranking all the missions in Peace Walker and MGS5 was a joy to do, even if they don't really scratch the same itch as the big boss runs. It's strange to think that it's been 18 years since a game came out that you could get big boss rank in, not counting Delta. Metal Gear was such a big part of my childhood, and I'm glad that these games are so dense and mechanically deep that I can still build new memories in them all these years later. Maybe someday I'll even do the games outside the strict mainline, like Portable Ops or Ghost Babel. I know that getting all the S ranks in Revengeance has been on my list for a long time, but I have been waiting for the confidence to actually take that leap. Not all franchises are worth putting in the time to learn them top to bottom, but I think Metal Gear has earned that, at least for me. Who knows if Fizzant will have anything like this, or if it'll even be a similar type of game to the old Metal Gears. But no matter what happens in the future, I am happy to have these games to return to whenever I want. That is all I had for today. I wanted to chronicle my experience doing something that I honestly would have done for fun anyways. Hopefully Volume 2 of the Master Collection comes out soon so people can actually play MGS4, experience how bad that motorcycle scene is firsthand. But until then, at least the other games are pretty accessible. If you have big bossed all these games, go ahead and chat with me in the comments about your experience. And if you have any questions, I'll always do my best to answer here, via email, or on my Patreon, which is only $1 but also basically only puts you on this end credit screen. I'd love to hear from you regardless of how you contact me. Otherwise, have a great day, and take care of yourself.